that you use to create that story that you want to tell. And what we always talk about is how do you make sure that you're creating both focus, right? So not talking about everything that makes you a great place to work, but also consistency. And I think for many of you, being a global organization, that can sometimes be challenging because you want to make sure that it addresses the local nuances that exist in those particular markets, but also making sure that no matter where a candidate is in the world, they're able to understand and recognize you as an employer so that you can really focus on what are those unique associations that they can make with you as an employer. And I think we're in a really, really interesting time now as we think about EVP development. It was, as we kind of entered the COVID pandemic, I really, we had clients saying, should we be doing an EVP? And I think at first my personal reaction was, no, maybe now is not the time. But as we started talking to a lot more companies, a lot more leaders in this space, we started to realize actually now is a great time. So, I think if you have an EVP, continue moving forward with it, or it's a great time to be able to take an EVP that you currently have and adapt it to the current situation and the context. And I'm going to show you some examples as we go through this, but, going down that journey of developing an EVP, especially now, but even in general, no matter where you're at and what is happening in the world outside of that, it helps, of course, with employee engagement in such a great way, all the way from, leadership all the way down into the organization. And, here are a couple key points that we really hone in on what really is the value of having an EVP during either when you're in a crisis or not. But I think one thing is it's really make sure that you have your brand consistency. As I said, people are out there forming opinions about who you are as an employer, whether it's true or not. This allows you to kind of tailor and build that narrative so that it's something that is really baked in truth and experience of really who you are as an employer. The other is it creates differentiation. I think that's always the hardest part as we start developing an EVP. I'm going to show you some examples is how do we make sure that we're differentiating ourselves in the market from our competitors? Especially now we're seeing so many companies are just saying the same thing. And of course, we're going to say, if we know inspiring purpose is something that talent wants, you should communicate that and you should talk about it. But how you talk about it, how you tell that story, how you create that tagline, it needs to be unique to who you are, especially versus your competitors. Of course, you cannot differentiate and come up with a new word to describe who you are, but really finding those truths and what really make you unique is going to help make you stand out. And so I'll show you some examples of some companies that we think have done a pretty cool job of creating sort of that brand differentiation. The other one is it attracts the talent you want to go after. That's also another piece sometimes as companies start to go down this path of creating an EVP is sometimes they only look internal, which of course it needs to focus on the internal piece, just like we've talked about. It needs to include the employee experience based in internal truth, but also being able to be attractive to the target group you're going after. So looking at what are those things that are important to your target group will need to be important because it does a couple of things. I mean, one, it really helps them to understand who you are as an employer, but also it sort of weeds out those people and they can self-select out if it's something that they don't want. And you also need to know, let's say, for example, corporate social responsibility is not that important to your target group. But if you say this is something that really makes us unique and differentiates us, that's okay. Go out and talk about that. But it's just important to know that it will be less attractive to less people. So it might be harder to find the people that will be a good fit and who care about some of the attributes that are really important and true to who you are as an organization. Of course, as I talked about, the employee engagement piece of it, especially now more than ever, I think that's what we're all craving and focused on. I mean, of course, we're all looking at hiring externally when we can and if we're able to, but right now, the employee engagement piece and creating that advocacy is absolutely going to be so crucial for us. And so, making sure that we're focusing on that and allowing the employees to become ambassadors for your organization once the EVP is developed. And then, of course, making sure that it does impact the bottom line. So linking it all together all the way from attraction, engagement, and through to performance. If I go to the next slide, this is sort of how we view the structure of the EVP. And this has actually adapted over the last year or so, I would say. You know, essentially when we created this this pyramid in the beginning, the top part of the pyramid, these first three areas that you see here, that was really the only part of the pyramid that we started with. But then we added this bottom row of target value propositions that you see here. And so I'll kind of walk you through this, but as you're developing an EVP, there's a few different ways you can do it. And we'll talk about the components that we see make a successful EVP. But if you sit at the top, of course, that's the core proposition, right? That is the employer brand promise, the DNA of who you are, the heart and the essence of that promise that you're making. Then, of course, underneath that are the supporting pillars. Usually you have somewhere between 3 to 5 pillars. Normally it kind of stays closer to 3 pillars that you're creating that of course link up to that overall core proposition that you see. But these are the qualities that really define the employment deal, right? Why is it that people come to work every day? What is it that talent should know about working there? What makes you a great place to work? And that's where you start to really have that consistency in that middle piece there. And then of course the part that sits underneath of it, that foundation piece, those are the proof points. Those are the reasons to believe. And that's where you start to gather some of those stories, right? If one of your pillars is focused on, let's say, innovation, for example, what are the stories that you can use to talk about what makes you an innovative place to work? Those are the stories that you're gathering from your employees to talk about, right? Those reasons to believe and what makes you unique. But this last piece that we've kind of added to the bottom of this pyramid is, how do you then take those pillars that you have and those proof points and adapt it to the different target groups? So for example, in some cases it might be by country. In other cases, it might be by function. It really varies depending on the organization. And we've done it lots of different ways where sometimes it needs to be by country, of course, identifying where those local nuances exist, but then also looking at it by specific target groups. So if you have blue collar workers versus those who are working in corporate roles, for example, again, still staying true to that sort of umbrella proposition that you have, but then being able to tailor that message a little bit to the different target audiences you have will be more important, I think, than ever before. And so this is how we kind of view the structure of the EVP. I will walk you through some examples because, as I said, they don't always all need to fit this exact pyramid that you see here. And there are some different ways of doing it that I will share with you in a few slides. When we start thinking about building an effective EVP, there are 3 components that we look at that really kind of stand out and allow you to start down that journey of creating an EVP. So one is the strategic perspective. You can see that green circle over there. That is really, if you think about leaders within the organization, right? The visionary goals of the organization. Where do you want the company to be in the next 3 to 5 years? And typically, you know, I've been doing quite a lot of EVPs at Universum over the last 13 years. And this is sort of the foundation for us. And it helps not only get the leadership perspective, but also helps with buy-in in the future as well, because the more that leaders are involved from all different areas of the business, it allows them to feel part of the process, and then they're more likely to sort of live and breathe that EVP in the future because they've been part of that process. And so a lot of times we start with interviews with leaders and stakeholders within the organization to start to talk to them not only about what is true about the organization today, but also where do they see the company going in the next 3 to 5 years? What are the challenges that they're facing? What types of talent do they need in order to achieve those goals? And the conversations that we end up having with them are just unbelievable. I can tell you most of the time when I do them, we block 30, 45 minutes and then we end up talking to them for over an hour. And it's always such a great dialogue. And again, it helps with the buy-in process. So I would encourage all of you to do that as well. And it's such a, you know, a great way to understand those visionary goals of the organization. The other is the internal perspective, of course, not only from leaders, but also from your employees. So that orange circle you see down the bottom. So talking to your employees, understanding, you know, why do they get up and come to work every day? What makes the company a great place to work? What is the culture? What is the personality like? What is true to who you are as an organization will be Absolutely crucial as part of this process. And I think that area is something that we see most companies always include as part of their EVP, is that internal perspective, right? Because you need to make sure that it's baked in reality. If you go out and start talking about things that aren't true to the organization and the culture, and the day-to-day work, of course, you'll have all kinds of issues and retention issues in the long term as well. And so making sure that it's based not only, the visionary goals and, sustainability, but also making sure that it's aligned to the internal truths. And then the last circle that you see here is that external perspective. And I think that's the piece that sometimes we see some companies forget to include. And, it's okay. It needs to, of course, come from the internal perspective. But we find that looking at least at the external perspective to understand what are those attraction drivers of your target audience, what makes them pick one employer over another? What makes them tick? Why do they pick certain companies versus others? What makes them want to, again, pick an employer in a specific career? What are their preferences of you over somebody else? What are their perceptions of you over someone else? And how do they stack up you versus your competitors as well, looking at that competitor landscape? And so in an ideal world, you're kind of looking at these three viewpoints and identifying where do you see overlaps and gaps in these areas. In an ideal world, as I started saying, there would be some messages in the middle of these three circles that you can already start to focus in on, because they can be part of the long-term visionary goals from leaders. It can be based in reality today from employees, and also be attractive to external talent. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes there might be an area where it's true to who you are today and it's part of the strategic perspective, but it may not be part of the external perceptions and preferences. And then we need to start kind of going down a path of deciding what is it that we actually want to include as part of our value proposition based on the data. So again, always linking it back and having that data-driven approach so that you're not guessing, right? Because then it's a little bit more bulletproof, and you can tend to keep that EVP for a little bit longer because it's based on data and you're not just guessing. And again, focus. That is the goal of this, is not going out and talking about everything that makes you a great place to work. We're trying to narrow down that message, because a lot of times, it can get diluted if you start talking about too many things. And so what we want to make sure is that we're keeping it focused and only talking about, those 3 to 5 things that really make you unique as an employer, and of course, attractive to your external group and aligned with the vision of the company as well. However, as I started saying, differentiation is so important as part of this process as well. And this is an example. I apologize if any of you are on this call and I'm calling you out, but these are some screenshots that we have taken over the last several months and years, and there are some new examples as well. But for a while, this whole idea of inspiring purpose has been something that has been talked quite a lot about. And of course, with this younger generation, it's something that they want to highlight. And so what we found is that everyone just ended up taking that and saying, okay, let's talk about making an impact. And so you can see this example here where everyone is saying, come here to make an impact. Come here. It's an opportunity for impact. Motivated to make an impact, ? Right? And so this is what we're trying to avoid, especially when you're in the same industry, like some of these companies that you see here. We don't want to all be going out and saying the same thing. Again, it's not that you shouldn't talk about purpose and impact, but it's how you say it so that it's not in the exact same language, because this is the example that we're trying to avoid. So doing that research to see how other companies are talking about it as well will be extremely important. So this is an example. If you think about that pyramid that I talked about earlier on, of a traditional sort of umbrella proposition. So this is the United Nations that you see here, showcasing on that umbrella proposition. So having that overarching sort of tagline, building a better future for all, and then those 3 supporting pillars, just like the pyramid that I had showed you earlier on. Again, based on data, talking to leaders within the organization, talking to employees about what the internal truths are, looking at the external talent market and understanding what is it that they want from an employer, all feeds into developing these. And of course, not just going out and saying we're innovative, or, we have, opportunities to, professional training and development, but it's putting it into that language that really describes and showcases your personality, I think is extremely important. So you'll see these different examples, right? This is an example of the United Nations. This is an example for a FMCG company, global organization here, which is more around, again, pillars that you see here. So instead of 3 pillars, they have 4 pillars, and they have these opening lines that link back to the pillars. So one around love brands, right? Our people feel the love when they describe where they work, because our brands are the kind people fall in love with. So you immediately see how that pillar then connects to the opening line for each of these. And again, global EVP that was developed, global organization with a lot of complexity, but taking it, and you can see how it's so true to who they are. Again, having a strong consumer brand, they're of course able to leverage that, but really kind of embeds who they are as an employer and describes them quite well. Another one is Lego. So this is a very unique example, I think, with a unique culture and a unique offering. So this one is much more around the heading differentiation that you see here. I bet if we were to take these and put these on another company, it would never work, right? And sometimes that's always our pulse check is, if I remove the company logo, would this apply to any company? And sometimes that is the case, but I would say in this case, they are definitely quite unique to this organization. I think, especially if you look at systematic creativity. I mean, what better way to think of Legos? And now I know, having a little boy at home, it's all we do every day. I mean, this is, absolutely describes Lego, and I'm sure the culture there quite well. And so you can see how these EVPs are all quite different, right? You have the one with the sort of overarching umbrella proposition and the 3 pillars underneath. You have the other example I just shared with you around how the headline kind of connects to it with the 4 pillars. And now you have this one as well for Lego with the heading differentiation. So there are lots of ways that you can do it, but again, our recommendation is always to base it on data and using, again, sort of that Venn analysis to make sure, does it kind of touch on all of those 3 viewpoints, and trying to keep it as focused as possible. And if you have an EVP already, I think now's a great time, as I said, to be able to kind of translate that EVP into the current context. So there might be certain pillars that you can dial up. Now, given the situation that we're in, purpose-driven brand, I think, is a great example of a pillar that can absolutely work perfectly well in this context. And having great stories and proof points that can kind of go underneath that, now's a great time to be able to live and breathe that. And we've heard lots of examples from companies who have said, even 10 years ago, when we were facing a downturn in the economy, they almost thought about stopping to move forward with their EVP. And they said, you know what, let's move forward, because when we get out of this, we want to be ahead of our competitors. And they said, we are so happy we continued down that path of building that EVP and launching it, even though it's a time of uncertainty. It's a great time to have that engagement from both your employees, but then also showcase to the external talent market that we're still here, and when we get out of this, come back and think of us. So some really unique examples here. If we switch gears a little bit, I want to show you some data from some various surveys that we've run at Universum. So as I said, we do some surveys, of course, with talent. We do quite a lot of talent surveys. We survey 1.5 million people globally every single year, but we also survey employers too. So we work with lots of different companies, lots of different industries on their employer brand and EVP. And so this is a survey that we run. It's called our EV Now survey. And so this is one that we have done now for several years. And so you can see how this breaks down. The question that we essentially ask them is, where does employer branding rank among your organization HR talent management priorities for the coming year? WMAE stands for the world's most attractive employers. That is sort of our internal lingo, but they're global organizations that you can imagine. Everyone from, Google to an EY to a Mars, just for example, so everything that it kind of makes up those top ranked world's most attractive employers. So what we're doing here is showcasing the top 2 bars are looking at the world's most attractive employers, how they responded in 2019 versus 2020. And then the bottom 2 is we actually extracted the data for those who had responded once COVID hit March 15th of 2020 and looking at large organizations. So right off the bat, you can see that employer branding is decreasing a little bit in terms of being one of the top priorities, especially compared to 2019. And of course, if you look pre versus post COVID, it does drop a little bit from 68% to 62%. However, only 3% said it's not a priority. So it's either one of the top priorities or it's important, but not a top priority. And so I think this is a really interesting slide because it's still showing it's somewhere in importance. And just because this has hit, it doesn't mean that it's, decreasing in importance and it's not an important topic at all, because again, it's making up the internal and the external component. If we look at some of the EVP attributes, this is another question that we actually ask respondents as they're taking the survey. We ask them, what attributes describe your EVP? So which of the following best describe the key elements included in your EVP? So we're actually asking companies to tell us which attributes they're including in their EVP. So we've broken it down, as you can see, into this wheel here, this positioning wheel. But right off the bat, you can see on the left-hand side, clear path for advancement. 14% of companies in 2020 said this is something that they're focused on. However, compared to 2016, it fell from 25% to 14%. So this is going down in terms of how employers are talking about it. And I think it's the same when we actually talk to talent as well. They're saying, I don't really want that clear path for advancement, right? I want to know that I can grow within an organization, of course, but I don't need to have that sort of clear path. It's more about experiences, right? That I want to have experiential learning versus having that very clear-cut advancement opportunity. If we look at inspiring purpose, 44% said it's included in their EVP. I shared some of those examples earlier. Innovation, 42%. Training and development, 42% as well of companies said that that is included in their EVP. That has gone up by 22%. Diversity and inclusion, of course, huge topic right now. I think companies that are prioritizing that absolutely are kind of differentiating and leading the way. Empowerment around personal impact, again, as we saw, making an impact, that is going up by 15%. Friendly work environment and corporate social responsibility. We are starting to see that go up, and it's interesting. 13 years ago when I started at Universum, looking at the data, that was a differentiator for a lot of companies. If you can talk about the corporate social responsibility, that would differentiate you. And then it started to become actually an expectation and a threshold item. And I think we're just starting to see more and more that's starting to change, and it's coming back around, and it's going to, both from a talent perspective, but also from an employment perspective. So again, looking at this and seeing, where does our EVP map, in terms of this sort of positioning wheel? Are we aligned to what other companies are talking about? Is there an area that we can start to differentiate, especially if we start to see things like CSR going up from a talent perspective? Is that something that we can maybe highlight and talk about? Same with diversity and inclusion. So interesting to see some of this as well. CSR, as you can see, had gone up by 16%. Talking about employee experience, this is another question we asked employers. Which of these processes have been influenced by your employer brand strategy? So no surprise, candidate management, onboarding and orientation, flexible working are the top three. I think especially now, the situation that we're in, we're seeing a lot more of this being done from a virtual perspective, right? All of the onboarding and the orientation. But 80% of the respondents, they believe employee experience is integral in employer brand management. And, as we talk to companies, especially now, they said, yes, of course we increased our employee engagement, but we also didn't forget about the external perspective either. But a bit of the focus is, of course, going to be on what is the experiences and engagement that our employees are having, both those who have been with the organization for a while and a lot of the newcomers as well. So again, just sort of a pulse check to see, is this something that we're also focused on as well? And are we putting some of these into place too? Because these are one of the, the world's most attractive employers are focused on in terms of their strategy. We also ask companies, what are the 3 words you'd like to be remembered for? in terms of how you wanted to, you want to be known for once this is all said and done, because that's what's going to happen when this is all over. Your brand will be remembered, how you've handled this situation. So we asked them, what are the 3 words you want to be remembered for? And you can see caring, people first, safety are the ones kind of coming up the most. Again, really talking about the culture around this pandemic. And a lot of them said, I want them to think we've had the resources that they've needed. There was a lot of communication. They work for an employer that's focused on health and safety and well-being. A lot around leaders as well, having inspiring leaders who are communicating to us on a frequent basis, daily emails from CEOs or leaders who are involved in kind of clearly communicating what is happening during this time will be really important. Interesting question around budget. So this one was done in sort of mid-March through mid-April, this survey. We just launched our second survey on Friday. It's a sort of a pulse survey specifically on COVID-19. And we're going to ask this question again to see if this has changed. But we just wanted to get a sense of, has this pandemic influenced your budget? What's interesting is that 58% said it's basically remained the same. Some of it was put on hold. Only 13% said it was reduced, and then 9% said it was reallocated. So quite interesting to see that. What a lot of companies are saying is that they're keeping their budget, they're just reallocating it to different media. So things that they would have done in person before is now just going to certain virtual tools. So you can see Brazen is one example that was called out in this quote below, and of course, social media. You can see how this breaks down by industry. So we then, of course, in addition to looking at it from sort of a global overall perspective, we also wanted to break this down and say, what does this look like by industry? So for professional services, of course, the majority of them said it remains the same, or we've just shifted or reallocated that. Banking, the same. Some of it was on hold. And of course, you can see how this sort of changes. I think energy, oil, and gas has probably shifted the most, but I think this industry is getting hit quite hard. It's a double whammy at the moment, right? It's especially in some countries, even more so. Russia, I know, but definitely COVID is impacting it, but also the price of oil going up is not making it easy. And I was talking to one of the employers in this industry, and I'm not sure if anybody within this industry is on the phone, but they said at first our approach was, we're just going to stop hiring. But what we're seeing is that companies are coming back and saying, okay, we can't stop hiring completely. We still need to hire. And what we're going to do is focus on the critical talent, the critical skills that we need. And that's going to be even harder. So that's what this exact company did, is they said, at first we stopped. And then we said, we can't do this. A month later, they came back and said, we need to go out and hire. And we need to hire for the critical skills that are needed to make our company grow and be successful in the future. But that's going to be almost even harder now during this time. And so definitely getting hit there. And then of course you can see, some of the other industries, CPG as well. Again, differences by industry, of course, no surprise. We're also asking around internships. This is a huge topic. I think we're already now kind of in the process of the internships in a lot of countries. But, again, knowing that this varies quite a lot by country and how the internships are involved, but you can see some of the examples here. A lot of them are planning on either increasing or maintaining their internship program. Some have said they are decreasing it, especially within engineering. They plan to decrease the number of hires. And then for professional services, they don't really know yet. And I think that was what we were hearing from a lot of them a month ago, is they were still holding out in hopes that this would maybe come back to normal and they can kind of go about their internship in a normal way. And you can see an example here. We also, in addition to kind of understanding that, we said, are you deferring start dates? Are you going a virtual route, or are you rescinding offers? And actually only about 18% of the companies said we're rescinding offers. A lot of them were hoping to really defer the start dates to a later point. We've heard some companies also say we're just shortening our internships as well. So from the typical kind of 10-week internship experience, we're just reducing it to 7 or 8, for example. And then just another way that we're looking at this is broken down by industry as well. And so you can see, not a lot of them are saying, we're rescinding offers. Of course, there are some industries that are doing that. And again, I think what talent is saying is just be honest with us and tell us if that is the case. But a lot of them are just saying, we're going to take this virtual and create that experience in the best way that we can. I think that we're recognizing that we can't take the normal in-person interaction that we had and just move it to virtual, right? So we have to kind of rework that virtual experience, but being able to now take this to a more virtual experience, and in some cases, just like I said, deferring start dates. And then of course, graduate recruitment. So asking the same question, what is the plan for your graduate recruiting program over the coming year? In some industries, as you can imagine, they are decreasing the hiring, energy, industrial engineering, automotive, seeing the biggest sort of numbers in terms of decreasing that. But within FMCG, software IT, professional services, either increasing or maintaining. And some companies saying, we just don't know yet. We're still trying to figure it out. And so again, a lot of differences by industry that you can see here as well. And then of course, technology trends. So we're asking them, which technologies have you implemented to support the recruitment, marketing, and talent acquisition? And so you can see the orange bar is looking at 2019, and then the green bar is looking at 2020. So no surprise, video interviews is increasing. And of course, now more than ever, the need for video interviewing is going to be even higher. Tech-enabled people analytics had also gone up. And then you see some things going down, chatbots, virtual reality, AI-driven search and selection going down a little bit more compared to 2019. So hopefully this just gives you a sense of what other companies are working on. We also just asked, I think a challenge that a lot of companies are trying to figure out now is how do we communicate? What do we say? Because there's, it's sort of this situation of we need to be constantly communicating, but we don't want to be insensitive and saying the wrong things either. And so what type of content should we put out there that isn't insensitive, but also can drive engagement? And so we just asked employers, what initiatives have you implemented to maintain an engaged workforce? So a lot of companies are saying we're talking about tips and advice that we can put out. We're showcasing virtual team activities, having more flexible hours as well. And we've heard from a lot of companies in terms of the types of content. I'm going to show you some examples that are getting the best engagement. It kind of shifted as you get further along in the process. I think in the beginning, it was very much about how we're giving back and how companies are, giving back and creating masks and things like that. And then we started to see how people are showing more things around working from home and, their dog in the background and all of that. But now I think the type of content that's getting the most engagement are sort of those unique messages. If a company has, partnered together with another company, right? Something that's just kind of unique to your organization is really going to make you stand out. We have some companies who've created specific sites for COVID-19 messaging. I think mental health and support will continue to be a focus and an increase, and I'll show you some examples as well around that. So once we've asked employers what they're focused on, we've also then asked talent, what do you think? We want to hear from them. And so this is just a snippet. We're still out in the field collecting some of this information, but I wanted to give you a kind of a sneak peek and a little bit of the data so you can kind of see what this looks like. I'll show you first broken down by type, student, full-time versus job seeker, and then also by region as well. But I think no surprise, for the most part, they are very worried about the future employment and how this will affect that. And of course, for job seekers, they're very, very worried. 47% identifying that. If we look at this by region, you can also see how this varies. So in places like Africa, much more worried. APAC, much more worried. North America, a little less worried. Still worried, but not too much. And so you can see how this really kind of varies. And we're going to talk about also some of the communication surrounding COVID. So we then asked talent to tell us, how do you feel the communication has been handled, right? Because as we saw earlier, employers are saying we want to be remembered for safety and health and giving back and being there to support them. And so we asked talent, do you think employers are handling this well? And I was actually really pleasantly happy to see that talent is saying for employers, they think it's being handled very well, almost 40%, 34% saying handled well, and then universities, not as much, well, or undecided. They're not so sure, but we wanted to hear from both employers and also how our universities handling this. So this is a global survey that we're running with talent as well. But then we asked them, when you say that communication was handled well, what do you actually refer to? And we kind of broke it up into these three areas. So I think one is absolutely around just the technical support. Do I have the equipment I need to function, right? For anybody, especially who's not used to working from home, and they now have to kind of transform their house or their apartment into a place to work. Do they feel that their company has allowed them and given them the tools and the resources that they need? And so you can see some of the quotes that talent has said, they've made it very easy for us. They set up a separate IT team to make sure that this was done very well. They gave paid allowances to buy new equipment. We were allowed to bring our monitors home if we needed to. So that was really, really important to them. Information flow, of course, as we talked about earlier, getting daily emails from leadership, CEOs, having live Q&As on a weekly basis, just updates in general, the status of the company. And I think we found, like, what we're hearing a lot is it's okay to be vulnerable during this time. The best thing a leader within an organization can say is, I don't know. It's okay to say that. They would rather, I think we can all agree that we'd rather hear that than, pretending that everything is okay, because it's quite a different situation. So being able to be vulnerable and just saying, I don't know, right? And that we're doing the best we can, and that's all there is to it. And mental health and wellness, I think, is also an important topic that we'll continue to probe on in some of the other surveys as well. But, had some companies talking about the Headspace app that they're using, so getting free access to that. Having online gym classes, I know, is something that's offered. Having, online coffee breaks, just making sure there is yoga, virtual yoga, things like that, that can make sure that our minds are working well. We're both, emotionally, physically feeling okay during this time, especially for those people who are maybe working from home by themselves and not really used to that. So, and then if it's not handled well, why not? And it's really, not having clear timelines, or just causing confusion, or not being, they said, I felt like they were not reactive enough to this situation, not being able to adapt to virtual working and remote working. So you can see again how this was handled if it was done in the wrong way. So sort of what not to do here. And I want to share with you some examples, and we'll kind of go through this quickly, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. So I just have a handful more of slides that I wanted to share with you, just on best practices. We've been collecting some of these examples, and again, different industries are in different situations during this time. Some are hiring quite a lot, and some are struggling. And in this case, we're showing a retail example. Of course, a lot of them are being forced to shut down their stores, and so how are they handling this in other cases? So you can see H&M, delivering gear to hospitals, for an example, showcasing that Under Armour making gear for different hospitals, Nike, Gap making making masks for healthcare workers. So anything they can do, since they're not having the stores open, and of course people aren't buying nearly as much, what are other things that they're doing here? An example of companies who are just supporting their communities. So you can see some of these examples here. I think Spotify is always a great example here. Facebook, talking about a hackathon in collaboration with the World Health Organization, Campari Group, just again, showcasing different ways how they're supporting bartenders, right? So being able to support their local communities and just posting this on Facebook and sharing that communication. These are fun examples using brands for humor. The one on the left, Big Mac, of course, talking about this. So Burger King showcasing, you maybe can't come and get a Big Mac, right now or whatever it is, right? So you have to be able to make it at home for Burger King. And so we're going to give you the recipe to make this at home. And so you can see some of this as well. And then on the right-hand side, Lego showcasing this, not all heroes wear capes. So really cute. And then sharing tips and advice, as we saw, a lot of companies are focused on that at the moment. So Exxon giving examples of how do you work from home? What are some tips that you can do? Some of it's like just, keeping your shoulders up straight or, elbows aligned. Unilever talking about video interviewing tips. So what are the things that you should be doing beforehand? So they're giving it again to people as they're interviewing, right? And so this is, on their Facebook careers page, you can see HSBC working from home example as well, tips on, what you should think about when working from home. I love this example too. Some of these companies are just thanking their employees. So Barilla is a great example. They, I think, listed everyone there. You can see down the bottom. So I don't know if you can always do that, but I think this is really nice. They literally listed them one by one, name by name. We want to thank you to all of those people working in the plants, right? And so I thought that was really special. And then you can see Unilever as well saying, we want to thank our colleagues on the ground and calling them heroes and things like that. Leaders, I think we've seen some really fun, inspiring leaders coming out. Michael Kors, we keep showing this example, come cook at home with Michael Kors. So he does videos and he's showing, how during you can cook at home with him and just different things to do to keep himself busy. So he showcases that at night. Grant Thornton, this CEO had child in the video. EY, I love Carmine. He does quite a lot. He's quite active. And so, he's talking about his football team that he has here. And so just different leaders that are coming out and really being super active in a very natural, organic, human way, I think is exactly what's resonating the most, right? We keep saying now is not the time to be glossy. Just be natural and human and organic and, vulnerable as well. As I said earlier, this is a great example of UBS working from home stories. So, you can see some of these fun examples, staying fit while also working, holding the laptop, home but not alone is sort of the tagline here, showcasing the pet. And then of course, desk sharing across all seniority levels. So with their child as well. So, talking really about, never alone. You have each other. We're all in this together, sort of. And then, of course, how do we take this onboarding and, into a more virtual way? And so you can see Microsoft now has launched their virtual internship program. It's on their blog. You can read more about it there, but 4,000 students they're bringing in this summer. And so, of course, that's quite impressive that they can then take that on a more virtual level. Unilever, you can see how this was India specifically, but, just showcasing some of their interns taking pictures, showing how they're staying connected during this time as well. And so, TomTom on the right-hand side as well, talking about onboarding, thanking, and welcoming some of their interns as well when they don't have as many, really cool and fun way to keep it interactive. And then I think upskilling talent is quite a huge topic now as well, both internally, of course, upskilling existing employees that you have, but then also offering this to the external talent market too. And so these are some examples. Schneider Electric has this energy university that they're offering and giving courses here. GE is another one, having a digital technology enterprise. I think some other companies have upskilling, academies and things like that they're offering to different recruiters as well that they can take part in. As well. So again, really cool examples here that you can see. And this is my last slide. I know I've been talking quite a lot, but just want to end with some, final conclusions and things to think about as we're, again, all in this together. And I think learning from each other, what we found is that, silence creates conjecture and fear. So say something, even if it's just a few words. This is definitely the moment of truth for the employer brand. And I think now with, employer branding really being at the forefront, it's an opportunity for a lot of companies to really work very closely with their PR, their comms as well, to get that story out there. There's a lot we can learn from each other, being, pragmatic, calm, be human. I think that's one of the things, and also play on some of that humor like we've talked about. And of course, let your purpose, vision, EVP be your compass for a lot of this. Leverage any stories that you can from real life examples on a day-to-day basis. And as I talked about, staying closely connected with comms, PR, brand teams, so you're getting the message out there in a really human and authentic way, and keep faith with the promises that you made for your employer brand as best as you can. So that is it for me. I'll open it up if there are some questions, or again, just dialogue and comments that anyone would like to make.
We have a question in the Q&A panel, and I also made a selection of the questions from the forum. If people won't ask them live, we can take them over as well.
Perfect. I see one here. How do you explain the trend 2019 versus 2020 before COVID? I'm not sure which one that was referring to.
So it was one of the first slides where you explained that you've seen the employer branding decrease as a priority for the companies in 2020, and I was wondering if you have an explanation, or you are still observing the trend to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still observing it to see absolutely where it goes. And I think what's happening is that a lot of companies are just looking at things a little bit differently. Again, you're looking 89% to 73%. And so I think we're still observing it. I don't have a clear, answer. I think during COVID, of course, no surprise to see that drop as well. But again, it's just priorities are shifting. I think they're looking at, other types of critical talent, skills and needs and things like that. So we are still looking to see if this is something that continues, right, over the next 6 to 12 months, or if it's something that was sort of just a one-off here.
Thanks.
Sure. I see the next question. Do you think it would be an appropriate moment for a company to update its EVP these days? I do, actually. I think it's a great question. At first, as I was saying, I really didn't think so. I thought that perhaps there would be, a time where this wouldn't be a great chance. But as I said, I do think it really is a good time to update your EVP. I think it helps with, of course, employee engagement from one perspective, but it also showcases the external talent market that we're here, we're coming back. And when this is all said and done, you can actually beat out some of your competitors in the long run. So I think our recommendation is if you're going down that path and you're thinking of doing it, I would say continue down that path and continue doing it, because you will win out in the long run. You'll get employees on board. They'll be engaged throughout it as well. And again, just remembering to translate it to the current context, I think will be absolutely important as well. So thank you. And I don't know if there was something else you wanted to add or mention, whoever had that question, but great question there. I see the next one. Do you consider VR as a suitable option for the employer branding development in the current context of COVID and employee experience? I do. I think that it was something that we saw increasing quite a lot last year. And I think especially now, if you think of career fairs and things like that, how do we take them to a virtual landscape, I think creating that experience in a very new way and utilizing virtual reality to still create that engagement and that feel that you can't necessarily get, but that you had when you were in person with them. I think from a career fair perspective, event perspective, I think it is a great option. And I know there are some tools out there. I can send some to you. We've collected as we've done advisory boards and things like that. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great option. Great question. Thank you. And I see another one. What can someone do on recruitment part using its EVP to preserve candidates engaged, even if the positions they were recruiting in past are not opened? Great question. So, I think a lot of companies are struggling with this. And I was talking to someone last week in the aerospace. They just went through a big merger, and they were sharing of course how some of their positions are no longer available, specifically with internship roles. And what they just said is they're not hiring at the moment. They have had to rescind offers. And what they're doing is, if it's an internship, they're saying, you know what, next year we're going to open that back up and we're going to bring you back into the organization. You are first on the list to have an internship for the following year, and we will make it a point to have a full-time offer ready and available for you next year. But right now we are just not able to, to offer that. And they were just very clear about that experience and the reality that they're having at this moment. And so, keeping them engaged, I think is, having them part of your, of course, ATS system, and having constant communication with them so that you don't lose them in case that position does open up, especially if they're in a critical skills role. I think, again, adapting that message, keeping them involved and engaged, and just being honest. If you're not hiring at the moment, letting them know that would be our recommendation. I hope that answered your question. I don't know if there were any other questions. I don't see anything else here.
I can share some from the forum. Somebody said that unfortunately their general manager made some mistakes in communicating during this crisis. And they were wondering, and probably they're not the only company dealing with that, so I think it's a really relevant question. They were wondering what they can do to cope with that moving forward and solve the issues that they have probably internally and or externally. If you have any advice.
Okay, it's a bit hard to know since I don't know the full context, but I would say involve other inspiring leaders who can also speak, because I think sometimes what happens is, at least our experiences as a leader, they may say, they feel that they have to maybe communicate a certain way and not be as vulnerable, but finding those people in the organization who can be vulnerable. I mean, there's nothing you can do now. If it was said internally with employees and it was said externally, it was probably taken out of context. I want to say I read something the other day that, of course, talked about BP when this happened. And, they had said, I think the CEO or one of the leaders had said, like, I just want my life to go back to normal. It's hard to come back after you say something like that. And again, I think we just need to remember that it was probably something that was said out of frustration and it was taken out of context. And having this leader, apologize and explain what they actually meant by it, and then showcasing other leaders in the organization who can really kind of bring that vulnerability. And, someone said something to me the other day that, normally the idea is treat somebody how you want to be treated. And they said, that's actually not true. It's actually treat them how they want to be treated, right? And I think it's such a great way of thinking about that as well. And so I think always just remembering that it was really important.
Thank you. We have a new question. How do you see the connection between the EVP and the branding commercial value proposition?
Ask it again, the EVP and
basically the EVP and the company brand.
Okay,
the
okay.
entire proposition.
Yeah. Sorry. I would say ideally they're quite linked and aligned as much as possible. I think it depends on the industry that you're in, but I think now what we're seeing is that a lot of times, like especially now during this time, they're very much connected. And in some cases, I think the consumer brand and the marketing team who's responsible for branding the customer brand, the consumer brand, is actually learning from the employer branding folks and talent acquisition folks, because now they're having to showcase much more of their employees and the real life experiences. And so, I think in an ideal world, they're very, very much interlinked and aligned to one another.
Okay. How do we make potential candidates care about our company when they are more concerned with stability and keeping their current job?
Oh, good question. Oh my
Tough
goodness.
one.
I don't know that I have a great answer for you. They are concerned with keeping their job, and I think everyone is at the moment doing the best we can. And are you talking about current employees, or are you talking about external talent?
External.
Internal employees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think just showcasing to them that you are there to support them will make them care for you in the long run. So as I mentioned, things around health and well-being, showcasing, that you're willing to be there to support them during this time, giving them the leniency to say, if you need to take off a couple days here and there, we're supporting you. Or if you need, mental health support, online yoga classes, those companies who are really kind of going that extra mile, doing the upskilling, like we've talked about, we've heard some companies kind of offering like teleservices for healthcare and things like that. Those are what's going to make the employee care about the company, because it's shown that you have treated them well, you have given them the care that they need, and just being understanding that, some days may be hard. I tell my team, there are going to be days you may wake up and you may say, I just don't want to do this today. And I said, that's okay. Don't just say, I need a day for myself. And I think it's the best thing we can do is to say, just have that day. And then, when they're feeling up to it and better, then again, just showcasing that you care, being vulnerable with them and saying, I don't have all the answers. I don't know either. And, showcasing the challenges you're facing, whether it's, having a child in the background, or, just sick of working from home and sitting at a desk, or, things like that. I think just showcase that you really do care about your employees and being open and honest about the situation. That would be my best advice. I don't know if it's perfect. If somebody has another idea, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, raise your hand if you have another answer to this tough question. And since we have tough questions, here's another one. How can we keep or gain the trust of people since we had to fire them or send them in unemployment for a while? I don't know if that's happened a lot in the US. But in Romania, we had a lot of cases of companies who had to do that to survive. So people staying at home without payment or with payment cuts. How can we regain their trust?
Yeah, I again don't think there's like a magic thing that you can do. I think, my experience is that at least I think people are understanding. They will be emotional in the beginning when this is first being told that they may no longer have a job. I think this is happening in lots of organizations where they're having to showcase that. And I think some people will take it better than others and be more emotional. But I think the recommendation would be, don't make it a business discussion, right? Don't talk about the business side of it. I think if you do it in a way that is human and real and brings out the emotion, that will make it easier. Because if you go in and have a serious conversation and say, we're doing this because we need to make cuts and we can't afford to pay everyone, and this is why we're letting you go, versus, you know, having a more emotional conversation that says, truly, we don't want to do this. And if we didn't have to let anyone go, we wouldn't. And, you know, having an honest, real conversation with them that explains to them, we still want your trust. And what can we do? And we don't want to do this. You know, how can we stay engaged, and making it more of a conversation versus making it about the business, I think will go much better, in our opinion anyway. So that would be my advice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And also, I don't know if everybody's seen this this morning, but Airbnb is going through a tough period of time, and their CEO communicated in a really, really nice way. So I think that could be one of the things we can do, be transparent and be vulnerable. He went all in with, hey, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry for this. So yeah, it's a good example.
Yeah,
I love that example. Did you see the Marriott one too? I'm going to look up the Airbnb one. I just took a note, but the Marriott one is also really good. Marriott's CEO. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
No.
Send it to you. He did the same thing. So powerful. I mean, you're crying after watching it. It was beautiful. You can tell he was literally in pain having to tell these people that we're going through this time. And I think that's the type of communication you want.
Yep.
Any other questions? You guys had some tough questions, and I will admit I don't have all the perfect answers. I'm sharing what we're learning and hearing and experiences. But if anybody has any other thoughts or best practices that they've also seen or implemented at your organization, we would love to hear them, I would say.
Kortney, I have a short question. What would be your advice if for a startup that wants to start some employer branding activities, and because it's just a startup, it doesn't have too much people, too much activity, so many needs as the big companies. What would be your advice, like to number one activity to do, like a mandatory activity?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question.
Thank you.
I would say, you know, identify a couple of unique selling points, you know, have some sort of communication like framework messaging platform. Doesn't need to be a full blown value proposition. If you have values, culture, whatever it is in place already, just gather some of those and have a couple key talking points and things you know you want to message around. And honestly, I think right now social media is one of the best things that you can do. And create a content calendar, look at, you know, how often do we want to post? Maybe it's 2 times a week, and, you know, get your employees to get involved in that. And again, don't be glossy, right? Take that selfie video of an employee talking about their day-to-day work, showcasing, you know, their new work from home situation. I saw a company the other day, I took a screenshot of it, and they had like a hat competition, right? And so everybody was on video and they had a hat competition, and, you know, they just showcase that. And so I think right now social media is one of the best platforms you can do to just start. I think probably for a startup, not hiring a ton, but just creating that awareness. Use it as an awareness and consideration opportunity. So not necessarily to talk about recruitment, but just brand building, and, you know, maybe post twice a week, identify, you know, a couple platforms. I think, you know, Facebook, Instagram, you can do great targeting, and it's not as expensive as LinkedIn, for example. So that could be, you know, a good avenue to use. And again, use your employees as ambassadors to get those stories out there, and create that engagement. We even find, like, sometimes if you do fun quizzes and things like that as well on some of those channels, like, it creates that engagement too. So
Thank you.
sure.
Are there any other questions, or does anybody want to share something? I think we're good.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Viorella. This was really fun, and I hope you all enjoy it. And you do have the deck, so if anyone does want it, happy to share it. Feel free to share it with everyone on the call. And really, thank you very much.
Thank you as well. As always, everybody's gonna receive a feedback survey request. Feedback is really important for us. It helps us understand what works and what doesn't, especially in this new context we're in, experimenting with Zoom and with virtual events and with everything. So please respond to that. We also recorded this session, so we're gonna share the recording with all the people who attended today. And if you have any further questions for us or for Kortney, you can just write them via email, and we're gonna share them with her. Thank you, Kortney, again. This was great. We love data, and you shared a lot of data with us. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to have you as a speaker on one of the Azure Hub events.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, great evening.
Have a great day as well, and great evening for.
Bye, Kortney. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
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 Bye.